Ask yourselves about your relationships. Are you giving or are you taking? Christ became God-man. And like I told you, that was a very difficult thing to swallow for Jews. He's not only divine, but also human. In verse 7, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. Again, nature, that word, morphe, taking not the form, but that very essence, the very nature. Internally, he is God. While being God, he took that very nature of humanity, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. He wasn't God, and then he stopped being God, and then became human. While still being God, he became human. He was both God and human. He became man while not ceasing to become or to be God. This should have two results in our lives. Our God, in all religions, to whom matter matters. Our God is the only one in all religions to whom matter matters. In the West, in the Greco-Roman religions, matter was thought of as evil. If you read about Plato or Aristotle, matter was evil. In the East, matter is unimportant or an illusion. Only in Christianity where matter actually matters. And including Judaism and Islam, the claim that God took flesh, took a body permanently, is a very difficult idea. Very unique idea. In the Eastern, they could say even if God did that, he could do it temporarily. But to do it permanently, he took that body and that's it, and he's staying with it permanently. For in him, Colossians 2, verse 9, dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily. When he came, he didn't only bless the spiritual, he also blessed the physical. Sometimes when we meet or we hear about religious people who kind of forsake the physical, say that the physical is bad, and just try to focus on the spiritual. Spiritual is really what matters. And others take it in the opposite direction. See, there's no spiritual life, there's nothing. Only the physical matters. We live for the physical pleasure. But God redeemed both the physical and the spiritual. St. Gregory the Theologian, also known as Nazianzus, he said, what has not been assumed has not been healed. Christ had both. And this was a heresy back in the day. That people were saying, you know what, he only had a body, a physical body. He didn't have a human soul. Only a human body. So they said that no, whatever has not been assumed has not been healed. He assumed humanity in its fullness, and it was healed in its fullness. Right? So the body and the soul he assumed, and the body and the soul or the spirit were healed. And as we become more religious, more spiritual, we should not ignore the physical. We should not ignore the physical, or the state of the physical world. What job did God give to Adam and Eve? To be stewards over creation. They were responsible for it. Right? And say, you know what, just worship me all day long, doesn't matter. Burn everything, cut all the trees down, all you need to do is what? Is worship. He said, no, you're stewards over creation, you're caretakers, you need to take care of it. Nor should we be physical. ignoring our spiritual lives. But only with Christ can these two be in balance. Can these two be together? Anywhere else, you'll find the focus is on one or the other, to the detriment of the other. Only with Christ, we see that there is redemption for both, for the physical and the spiritual. And that's why as Christians, we ought to have a sense of social responsibility. When we see something wrong with the community, they're bad, they're outside. There are no good people outside of the church. If they were good, they would be inside the church. Right? We don't need to go outside. They're in here. But as Christians, we have to have this responsibility. And we see the fathers have the same thing. The church fathers. St. Basil writes on social responsibility. And he talks to people about, those people who build bigger barns. And, tearing down their barns to build bigger ones to store things. Right? He's saying, you know what you do when you get a raise? When you get a raise, all of a sudden that bottom line, that level or standard of living, your idea of your basic needs moves up. All of a sudden what I needed to live on yesterday, because I got a raise today, is no longer what it is today. Today, this is what I need. And every time I get a raise, I get something, I need more. This is my basic. I can't go below this. He's basically saying, simplify your life so that you have something to give. St. John Chrysostom writes on the same thing, on wealth and poverty. We ought to have this sense of social responsibility. Even in heaven, we're going to have bodies. So the idea that we ignore the body is not good. We're going to have the resurrected body, but still bodies nonetheless. We're not going to be these incorporeal creatures, just intelligences, consciousness floating around. The other way it matters is that he became human. So he understands you and me. He understands us. He knows what it's like to be betrayed. He knows what it's like to be lonely. He knows what it's like to be rejected. He knows what it's like to face death, face danger. He knows what that's like. He's human. He became human, so he knows what it's like for you and me. He knows, he can relate. Which means you can go to him. Hebrews 4:15. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. He can sympathize because he became man. And here's the thing. He didn't just become man. He could have become a great man, a rich man, a strong man. He came in the form of a servant. Emptying himself. What does emptying himself mean? What did he empty himself of? He was still divine. He was still very much divine. He did not empty himself of his divinity. What did he empty himself of? There are two ways to think about this. He emptied himself of his glory. Or he also emptied himself of his prerogatives, his rights, his privileges as God. And he came in the form of a servant. I'll read to you verse 6 and then I'll read it to you again a different way. Who being in the very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. This is his story. If this was about us, it probably goes something like this. Though we were not equal with God, we counted equality with God something to be grasped. Making ourselves not nothing, something. I want to be something. I want to be somebody. Do you see the difference? It's a huge difference. But having the mind of Christ, we understand how things really are supposed to be. We understand that it's not fear or anxiety or stress that ought to dwell in our hearts is peace, assurance, hope. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. You know that back in the 60s, the first Russian to orbit the Earth, Russian astronaut, he went up there, and the Russian president came on the TV and said, "We as an atheist nation have further proof that there is no God. We sent an astronaut out there, and guess what he didn't find? Well, he didn't find Santa Claus, first of all, and he didn't find God." Right? At that time, C.S. Lewis, if you know who that is, he's Anglican, he's a 20th century apologist, philosopher. He wrote on this, he wrote an essay, kind of like a response. He said, "We do not relate to God like people in the first floor relate to the people in the second floor. Or people in the second floor relate to the people in the third floor. We don't go up to see where he is. We relate to him the way Shakespeare relates to Hamlet." Alright, Hamlet? At least heard of Hamlet? Anybody not here? Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. If Hamlet in his story is to know anything about Shakespeare, how would he do that? Would you look up in the theater? Would you go up on the rafters? Would you go on top? How would he know about Shakespeare? Shakespeare has to write himself into that story. He has to put himself in the story. And this is exactly what God did. He wrote himself in the story. He put himself in creation. He came in the fullness of time. He was born of a woman in the form of a servant, humbling himself, emptying himself. And he's saying, "You know what, I didn't just do that, save you and I'm done. Don't do it again. I'm not coming back." Okay? No, he's saying, have that mind of Christ. It changes everything. Everything. Christmas, what's Christmas about? Having that mind of Christ. It's not just a holiday. It's not just a reason or an occasion to spend. It's about having that mind of Christ. It's a reminder. Do we have it? Do we have that mind? Do we think the same way? We live here in Guelph. It's 2015, it's Canada. You hear about things happening around the world. Do these things scare you? These things worry you? You go to school, you're faced with situations, with exams, with things happening. Do these things stress you out? Where's the mind of Christ? The book of Revelation is very interesting. Even if you understand none of it, the symbolism is straightforward. There is a lamb, and there's a dragon. And at the end of the story, the dragon loses, and the lamb wins. Even if you don't understand anything else, understand that this is the reason for our hope. That at the end, the lamb wins. We shouldn't be standoffish, kind of afraid to engage, afraid to talk about our faith. That first image that we have of God in the Bible, what is it? That first image. What does he do? First thing that God does in the Bible. Don't be afraid to stand. What does he do? Creation. He's got his hands in the mud. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. He's in there. He's making something, right? And at the end, that creation is not just restored, it's elevated. When we were born, when we were created, we're created in the image of God. Christ comes and ups the ante a little bit, makes it a little bit higher, elevates our status to what? To sons. Adoption. Right? adopts us, we're sons, we're daughters, we're children of God. Right? And in the middle, we see what happens. He's born, taking that very essence of that creation that was ruined, and then later on, he redeems that creation. He dies on the cross, he fixes that problem. And not just fixes it, but opens up the way again to heaven. The incarnation, and the doctrine of incarnation has to have a huge impact on our lives. The way we live, the way we think, the way we see the world, the way we interact with our peers. It's a huge deal. It's not just a matter of a historical event that happened many years ago and that's it. St. Athanasius wrote about the incarnation. And he said that, you know what, even a king visiting a village in his kingdom, just a village, not even a city or a thing, visiting a village, the enemy would be afraid to attack that village. The king is there, his presence is there, his authority is there. The enemy is afraid, but we don't realize that the king is in that village. We don't have the mind of Christ. Now is the time to ask. Ask yourself, especially around Christmas, the incarnation, the nativity. Do I have the mind of Christ? To him be the glory forever and ever.
If we have time, if we have questions. They usually walk our shy all the time.
They're very shy.
Especially inside the church.
How many people read this book? The Incarnation, St. Athanasius. Read it again for those who have read it. And if you haven't read it, read it. Okay? You're not you will not understand really creation fully without reading it. And even after reading it once, it's still not enough. But if you haven't read it, and you call yourself Coptic, shame. He's Alexandrian. Okay? Around the whole world, some of our church fathers are accepted and welcome, some are not so much. St. Athanasius in his time, he's famous for that phrase, contra mundum, against the world. They said to him, you know, the whole world is against you. He said, I don't care, I'm against the world too. I'm not going to let go of my faith. Now, universally, he's so much respected, except in his own church. So this should not be. If you haven't read this, read it. It's very small, very short, okay, very well written. Read it. Thank you.
محدش عنده سؤال؟ No questions؟ فرصة. فرصة. Any questions؟ حبايبي. طالعين الامتحانات خلاص. طبعا I have to say يعني I really myself I really enjoyed the topic today and thanks for Abu Yohanna for inviting Fr.Paul.